So last month, I offered a lesson on the concept of spiritual healing, and I did so with the support of the book, The Quest for Wholeness, which was written by longtime Unity minister, author, teacher, Robert Brummett. And at that time, I noted that we were going to pull that book back off the shelf this month to take a look at the concept of wholeness itself, and today is that day. Our co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, once wrote that the power that created you is always at work to restore you and to maintain you in wholeness. Now, those words were at the very top of the chapter of Robert's book, and so I don't know, but perhaps those words, and especially that phrase, is always at work, influenced the way that Robert approached his ideas around wholeness. See, his entire book is based on our being on a quest, which is usually seen as a type of journey, and journeys are usually seen as typically having a destination. But if we consider Myrtle's words, that wholeness is something that Spirit is always working to restore, always working to maintain, help us maintain, then we can follow Robert's questions that he posed at the very opening of his writing on the chapter of wholeness. What is wholeness? How do we find it? And is wholeness really a destination, or is it to be found within the journey itself? Those questions are our jumping off point for today. So what is wholeness? It's like asking somebody, what is love, right? For all of those who might respond to that question, chances are we would get a very different and unique answer from each, right? So Robert offered a few ways in which those answers relative to wholeness might take shape. For example, one might focus wholeness on physical health. Another might speak to wholeness as being, states of mind. Whether that be happiness, joy, contentment, peace. Still another might emphasize the experiences of harmony and love in relationships. And then there's wholeness that can be associated with all the various forms of prosperity that exist. Now, while each of these are unique, there is a common thread running through each. And that is that all of them are visions of wholeness that are based on someone's personal needs, personal desires. Now, another common thread that is there is the consideration that even if someone manifested one of those focal points, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are experiencing and living from a place of wholeness. If someone could be extremely healthy from a physical perspective and be experiencing total dysfunction in every other area of their lives, and someone looking at that from the outside would not be able to define or describe that person as someone who is living in a state of wholeness. So another way that we might view wholeness is what Robert described as an idealized state of perfection. An idealized state of perfection. This is where someone envisions perpetual happiness. Life with no concerns, no cares in the world. It's basically the life that we're offered a lot through television ads and print ads, right? But if someone would choose to see that vision from more of a spiritual lens, then the wholeness would be seen as an idealized holiness, idealized perfection. There would be no feelings of anger within you. There would never be any vice in your life. There would just be perpetual smiles on our faces. And whichever view you wish to consider, Robert asks us, are either of these really the true vision of wholeness? Is wholeness an external condition? Does it need to look a particular way? And then from a unity, a new thought, spiritual perspective, we could simply ask, are we not always whole? I mean, if Myrtle just said, we just said that Myrtle wrote, that God is always at work. His Spirit is always at work to restore us and maintain us in wholeness. Is wholeness then not our inherent and natural state? From a spiritual perspective, yes. We're always whole from a spiritual perspective, but in this life, We exist in more than just the spiritual dimension. There are all those other dimensions that we noted just a moment ago. The physical, the mental, the emotional, where our wholeness may shift and change and move from one day to the next. So let me share where Robert Drummond landed as to what wholeness means to him. He writes, an all-encompassing definition of wholeness eludes us, because wholeness itself is a divine idea. We can never totally define a divine idea. It is an idea flowing forth from divine mind. A divine idea has infinite possibilities for expression. Wholeness can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. We can fully know wholeness only through our experience of it. In essence, what we can take away from those words are, first, wholeness does not have just one or any particular form, that it cannot be judged based on only outer appearances. And since it is an undefinable divine idea, it's something that each of us experience when we live consciously from our most authentic self, our highest self, our spiritual natures. That being said, Robert still recognized that what we may know in our hearts does not always appease our minds. You know, our minds are curious, our minds want words, our minds want details as to what this wholeness might look like. So I'm going to share a few words from the book that Robert put forth as being both descriptors of the journey of wholeness and also prerequisites to reaching the destination of wholeness. And the first of these is self-awareness. And when someone asks you, who are you? How might you answer that? And from what perspective would you answer that? It seems to me that no matter how we all chose to approach that, we would have to qualify whatever it is we say in some way. Because you know that saying that goes, we don't know what we don't know. So maybe in a given moment, when someone asks you, who are you, we can offer our answer based on what we know of who we are in that same moment, while at the same time acknowledging that we don't know what it is we don't know about ourselves in that moment. Right? Confused yet? Well, let me throw a paradox on top of that for Robert, who said the best way to begin the journey to self-awareness is to assume we know nothing about ourselves. So what is this part of the destination and journey of wholeness all about? Well, I gleaned at least three things from my reading of the book. And the first was that self-awareness is about recognizing that each of us lives our lives through filters, through various filters. There are filters we acquire through our upbringing, our culture, our conditioning, our belief systems, the images we hold of ourselves. Robert calls it not seeing things as they are, but seeing things as we are. Think about that game. And I always played it as a child, and adults can do it too. But get people, you sit around in a circle, and one person starts and they whisper a short story of some kind into the ear of the person next to them, and then that person repeats it, and that person repeats it until that story gets told all the way around the circle. And when that story is retold by the last person to hear it, there's usually some differences to it from the original, right? And it does so, it changes because each person in that circle told the story as they heard it, and they heard it through the various filters that were within each one of them. If everyone had been able to just let their filters go, let go of the filters that color themselves, that color their perception of others, there would not have been a single change made in that story as it made its way around the circle. The second thing that I gleaned about this part of our journey and destination of wholeness in terms of self-awareness is one where we're reminded that our ordinary awareness is impacted by what we experience and how we react to it. Everything we experience, it is constantly being judged or critiqued or evaluated or analyzed by our minds. I mean, our our minds are so busy, so very often throughout the day, our minds react. And they do so quickly that what we can see or what we say we see as having been a life experience may not be what actually was experienced. Take a person who has been conditioned over many years of their life to believe that they are not loved, that they are not lovable. And they have someone they consider to be a friend. And they call that friend and they ask them to call them back. And the person doesn't. The experience that that person would see for him or herself would be an experience of rejection by a friend. Just another rejection of a friend. Where in reality, the experience that actually happened was the friend having had an emergency arise that made her or him unable to return that call right away. It was returned later into the evening, and it was returned because they cared about the person. So being aware of these first two items, it leads us into the third thing that I took away, and that is the practice of self-observation. Observation that's not done with judgment or analysis. Observation that's not done, by trying to change what is being seen. It's done with a desire to attain understanding, to experience new awakenings to new aspects of who we are, to know what just a moment ago we did not know about ourselves. When we can do that, change that's meant to happen, it's going to happen automatically. Because as we have often said in so many different situations, the change that takes place within first will automatically show up in changes in the ways we express in the outer and how we experience the outer. So however it is that you can go deeper into an awareness of your human nature, your ways of judgment or analysis, evaluation, and how whatever your filters might be, however you can go deeper into that. It could be through a prayer or meditation or some other practice that you have. Allow it to then lead you into a deeper awareness of your spiritual nature. Your spiritual nature. Allow that next level of your inherent wholeness, the wholeness that is you, to make itself known. So another marker along the way, another descriptor and prerequisite of wholeness is that of balance. That makes sense to me, that balance would be an integral part of an experience of wholeness. And when I think of balance as it relates to wholeness, it means that all of who I am, the totality of who I am, all those dimensions that we've been talking about, they're working together to achieve it. And it doesn't mean that there's an equal distribution of the load amongst each of the dimensions, but whatever each is doing, when they're working together, balance is attained. An example for me that I always fall back on is from over the years of living with chronic illness, which on its own, can certainly knock me off balance now and again. However, when those experiences occur, I've learned over the years how my mental outlook, how my emotional outlook, how my spiritual practices and beliefs can counter that and serve to keep me in overall balance. If you have been able to know me and to see me 27 years ago when I was first diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and then witnessed me from that point up to about 1999 or 2000, you would have seen my entire life experience, my entire identity being dictated by the illness. My mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions were completely taken over by it, and I was completely out of balance. And so, unbalanced, unhealthy, unworthy, undeserving, that's what I knew about myself. That was the only awareness I had about myself. But since the turn of that millennium, it's been a completely different experience. And it is all due to my bringing my mental and emotional and spiritual dimensions and allowing them to have a seat at the table. Allowing all those dimensions that I am to work together to achieve as much balance, as much wholeness inside and out as possible, knowing that not one dimension has to carry the full load. So what can we take away for further personal considerations about balance? Well, first, the importance of giving all aspects of who we are some attention. If we ignore just one, we will be out of balance. We will not be experiencing the wholeness that we're talking about today. And again, it's not that we have to give equal time to each dimension in our life. And Robert made a very important point in his writing where he said, this is about giving the necessary time when something needs to be brought back into balance. Yes, for one of you, maybe that necessity is getting 8 hours of sleep at night. Maybe for someone else, it is making sure that you do whatever is necessary to have 5 days at least a week where you spend some time in prayer or meditation. Another's necessity might be eating certain foods or avoiding others. Each experience will be unique to each person, but we will find our own formula for balance by always listening to all of us, body, mind, and spirit. The second thing we can do is that we can remain aware of what others or our culture or our society says is quote unquote normal. If that doesn't feel healthy and natural, then it's likely not a normal that will support your overall balance and experience of wholeness. So allocate time to just step back from life. Step back from life, look at all areas in life that can act as a bit of a seesaw. If you can envision one of those on a playground, allocate time to just be with work and play, solitude and relationships, meditation and activity, thinking nature and feeling nature, spiritual practice and secular life. And remember that just because we find any kind of imbalance in any of those areas and in the practices of our self-discovery, it does not mean it can't be brought back into balance. I know Libby and Michael talked about them in their past, and they had like a bike touring company, and I know many of you ride bikes. I mean, it's a big activity up here. Think about it as riding a bike. And think about how you can be out on your bike on any given day, in any given place, and how many times do you feel yourself going off balance and how easily that imbalance is corrected? As it is on that bike, so it is in life. The process of balance is one that is ongoing and requires our attention throughout the entire ride. On that ride, we'll find the next descriptor and prerequisite of wholeness, and it's self-actualization. Now, that was a term that was first coined by the psychologist Abraham Maslow. When he was practicing back in the 1940s, 1950s, most psychologists placed their attention and their research on neurotic and mentally ill people. Maslow chose to focus his attention on the mentally healthy. And as he did, and as he dove into his research, it led him to find a population of people that he decided to refer to as super healthy. The super healthy people. He found they had different motivations than those referred to as normal and healthy. They had different values. And they had one characteristic that stood out from all the other people. He said they lived life from the inside out. They were self-actualized people. And that meant that their values, their goals, their standards, their behaviors, and so forth were not given to them by the usual means. Parents, relatives, teachers, authority figures, all our sources of influence in our lives. Instead, they came from an internal source. Robert wrote, their sense of identity, their morality, their motivations seem to arise from within themselves and contradict the norm. Now, that doesn't mean that they were rebels or revolting against authority. It just meant that they tended to be more indifferent to the common standards of truth or values and were much more self-referential in making their choices. Now, some might assume that people like that might be, a bit more immoral, or lacking of compassion for others. But the opposite was found to be true. They actually had a stronger sense of both than most people. And for them, maintaining their integrity and their personal commitment to their values was of utmost importance. Integrity has always meant a lot to me, because it means that I'm standing in my most authentic self, my spiritual nature, and I'm integrating that self into whatever it is that I'm doing. And when I step out of integrity, I immediately feel an inner conflict starting to take place. Part of me has broken away from what was whole. And I need to take time with that. I need to engage with it, ask it questions, talk to it, and then bring it and myself back into wholeness. One where there is, again, integrity in body, mind, and spirit. When we can trust our inner selves, when we choose to live our lives based upon the guidance that we receive from Spirit, we are bound to experience so much of what Dr. Maslow came to discover within the people included in his research. Listen to this list and see if it's something you'd like to experience. A high degree of openness to new experiences. A willingness to leave any given comfort zone and experiment with new ideas and activities. A greater enjoyment of creativity, having no attachments to tangible outcomes. A strong connection with our inner nature, whether it's seen from a spiritual perspective or not. A high degree of flexibility and resiliency. A desire for self-expression more than one for fulfillment. And an interest in sharing and giving that far surpasses any need to receive. Robert Brummett summed it up quite well, I think, when he summarized what being a self-actualized person is. He said, to be whole is to be self-actualizing. To be whole is to become all that we are capable of becoming, and to know that the capability itself is always expanding. Always expanding. Kind of takes us back to Marco, doesn't it? Who told us that Spirit is always at work in us, always at work with us, always supporting and revealing who we are, the wholeness of who we are. Revealing who we are from within. Author Jack Canfield has told a story, many of you have probably heard it. It's a story about a group of monks in Bangkok who had to relocate a clay Buddha that had been at their temple. They needed to move it to a new location because this is back in 1957, and there's a major highway project was being constructed where the temple was located. And so the Buddha's arranged to have it moved, and the crane came, started to lift it up, and it started to crack. And then the skies opened up, and the rain started to fall. And so they put it back down again on the ground, and they covered it with a tarp to protect it. Later that night, a couple of the monks went to check on it. And when they lifted up the tarp, they saw something gleaming from the cracks. So they got their chisels and their hammers, and they all just started to chisel away, chisel away, chisel away. And what they revealed was this solid gold Buddha that had been residing underneath all of that clay. And it was determined that that solid gold Buddha had been there for several hundred years. Your golden self, your wholeness, has always been within you, always. For whatever reason, Some of it may have gotten covered up. For whatever reason, you might be a little concerned about taking a chisel to it now and then. The time has come for you to discover it. So if you do have any difficulties or concerns about that process, I would encourage you to just remember one lyric from that beautiful song that we heard just before this lesson began. You are a work of art, a masterpiece. Spirit could not have created anything less. God bless you.